Hello and welcome to DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf, and today I'm going to speak in moderate tones because one of our wonderful listeners yesterday wrote me a note and said I was screaming and it nearly caused her to have a car accident. I won't scream. Drive safely. Keep your eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel. Don't use your cell phone. Just listen to this podcast. But we'll try not to keep it so even keel that you think we're not paying attention to the news, which is fucking crazy. Okay, I'll calm down. Fortunately, to offset my, East Coast Jewish insanity, we've got from the Midwest, even keel, Riley Fessler. How are you doing, Riley?
I'm doing splendidly. How are you, David?
Wow. You could be on NPR right now, lulling people to sleep. But if you want a little more East Coast Jewish insanity, but a different flavor, a Zoomer flavor, not this boomer get off my lawn insanity, we've got Minna Stein. How are you doing today, Minna?
I'm going to hold a cup of tea during every episode from now on. And if I spill it on myself, that'll be the barometer that you're getting too loud.
That's a nice idea. And I wish people could see the way you acted that out because that was really, that was really good. But I'm just going to be like the Alistair Cook, remember from Masterpiece Theater? Welcome, lady. Or David Attenborough in one of those nature documentaries. The tiny mouse sees the giant snake, but tries to escape. Oh my goodness, the snake is approaching. That, by the way, is basically our news. And folks, I got bad news for you. You're the tiny mouse. And the snake is approaching. Who's kicking us off?
Me. President Trump delivered a lengthy address to a joint session of Congress celebrating his administration's accomplishments in its first 6 weeks and reiterating campaign themes rather than introducing new policies. He faced significant opposition from Democrats who staged protests, including one lawmaker being removed from the chamber. Trump emphasized his support for tariffs, criticized federal bureaucracy, and praised Elon Musk's effort to overhaul government operations. The speech largely focused on relitigating past grievances and attacking his predecessor, Joe Biden, rather than outlining a forward-looking agenda.
That was pretty even keeled there, Riley. You said it was lengthy. It was the longest speech ever delivered by a president to a joint session of Congress or via State of the Union. It was not the State of the Union, of course, because he'd just become president and you can't give a State of the Union until you've been president for a year. But it was everything that you'd get in a State of the Union from Donald Trump, which was almost 2 hours of talking, more lies than you can count, lies about everything. Almost everything he asserted was a lie, was founded in a lie, was framed in a lie, and was surrounded by other lies. And his approach was, I wrote a piece for the Daily Beast, and you can go and look at the piece for the Daily Beast, in which I said, not only was it like many authoritarians or dictators or despots, kind of intended to be so long that it numbed listeners to what was actually going on within the speech, but he added a Trumpian twist, and I called it game show authoritarianism, because he had all these people in kind of the studio audience, which I mean the people in the balcony seats of the House chamber, and he just one after another, to a degree we've never seen before, would call them and stand them up. But he didn't just tell their stories or have them wave to the crowd or give them a salute for being good Americans. He turned it into a game show. What? This little kid wants to be a member of the police department? We'll make him a member of the Secret Service. What? This guy wants to join the West Point, get accepted to West Point? You're in. Congratulations. You win a car. You win a car. You win a boat. You win a trip to Europe. It was cuckoo, but it was pernicious because the whole point in addition to getting stories in hometown papers about what a great guy Trump was to hide the fact that the speech was also about gutting the government, blowing up the economy, attacking our allies, pursuing insane economic policies, going after judges, going after the rule of law, going after the authority of the Congress, sitting before him. The whole Doge thing is, of course, an assault on the Article 1 powers of the Congress to appropriate. People weren't paying attention to that because he was saying, oh, this individual went through something bad and we're going to reward them. Some of it was cuckoo, of course, like, oh, I'm all for the police. He said in the chamber that the rioters that he incited to come onto Capitol Hill went into, defiled, and whose actions resulted in injury to police officers and deaths to police officers. I thought that this was kind of, the chutzpahdik moment. I told you I was East Coast Jew, but this is the chutzpahdik moment of this whole thing where he said, I want a law that says that people who kill cops get the death penalty. And I was thinking to myself, do you mean, would that include people who incited riots that resulted in the deaths of cops? And how do you feel about people who pardoned 4,000 people or however many people he pardoned who participated in a riot that resulted in the deaths of cops? It was hypocritical. It was full of untruths. It was dangerous. And also, it was stultifyingly boring. Sadly, the Democratic response was to sit there and hold up tiny little signs that looked like kind of the readout you used to get from a Magic 8-ball with like little snippets of Musk is breaking the law, or oh my goodness, or clutching my pearls, or whatever they said on them. It was pathetic. The Democratic leadership looked foolish, and even as Trump spoke, the vast majority of Democrats seemed to shrink in their seats until they became like little tiny children watching a cartoon show. One exception, as mentioned by Riley, Representative Al Green, who stood up and said that Trump did not have a mandate to cut Social Security and Medicare. He said it a couple of times. Mike Johnson took umbrage and had him dragged out, carried out of the, or not carried, but ushered out of the Congress. This, by the way, as Republicans regularly interrupted the president, shouted, screaming, stomping, Marjorie Taylor Greene violating the rules of the Congress, wearing a hat, saying Trump was right about everything. They were allowed to get away with all that. But when one single voice criticized the president, dragged out of the Congress, authoritarian style. It was horrible. And then, of course, minutes later, the speech being what it was, Trump said, I'm standing up for free speech, unless you agree with me, in which case we'll have you removed from the chamber. So it was, it was a shit show. And, that's probably what you expected from it. But as Riley also said, it did not move the agenda forward one bit. There was nothing new in it. There were no new ideas. There was no vision for America. There was nothing that was going to help America. Alyssa Slotkin and the Democratic response tried to get to some of that, but nobody was awake. And her response was super earnest. And I think she's a good person, a real public servant, an excellent person to be a senator. But I don't think it left a mark at all. And so here we are, continuing on this merry-go-round ride. We'll go on to our next story.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky expressed readiness to negotiate peace with Russia to end the ongoing conflict, emphasizing Ukraine's desire for lasting peace. Trump revealed he had engaged in discussions with Russia, which he claimed showed strong signals of readiness for peace, though he provided no specific details on how to achieve it. Meanwhile, tensions between the U.S. and Ukraine were highlighted after Trump paused military aid, promoting Zelensky to pledge efforts to repair relations and sign minerals deals with the U.S.
During his speech, Trump said he'd received a letter from Zelensky and framed the letter as essentially complete capitulation to his demands. First of all, he didn't receive a letter. Zelensky's proposal was outlined in a social media post. Secondly, it revealed that what is really important to Trump here is not U.S. national interest, but his ego. I don't think it was necessarily a smart thing for Zelensky to do. Maybe he thought he had no choice, but he actually does have a choice because Trump actually doesn't want peace. Trump doesn't care. Trump wants victories for Trump, like a deal to get rare earths that may or may not exist, or to seem in charge of the peace process so he can go and get his Nobel Peace Prize someday. But at the end of the day, we get to the question of what does peace look like? And Trump's idea of what peace looks like is treating Ukrainians and Russians as equals in this, having equal grievances, even though Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, has been in Ukraine for 11 years, up the ante with an even bigger invasion a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. And, is the aggressor, is the wrongdoer here. But Trump is going to want to do a peace plan that is the Russian proposal. We keep the land, we keep Crimea. Ukraine is never in NATO. The peacekeeping force is to our specifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And once again, Trump will say, well, Zelensky's not ready for peace if he's not willing to accept the Russian terms. And frankly, if he is willing to accept the Russian terms, then he's being played for a fool because every time Russia makes an agreement of this sort, it breaks it. So we'll see how it plays out. And certainly, there is some significance to the idea of talking, but don't just watch what people say, or watch what they do, beginning with two inveterate liars, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Riley?
The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 emergency ruling, refused to block a lower court's order requiring the Trump administration to release nearly $2 billion in unpaid foreign aid under existing contracts, dealing a setback to the administration's efforts to reshape federal spending. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the court's liberal justices in the majority, while conservative justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh dissented, with Alito criticizing the decision as granting excessive power to a single judge. The Supreme Court's decision leaves in place the lower court's order, which the administration argued was impractical to meet on such short notice.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is a little sliver of good news in this, which is that not every judge on the right on the court views the Constitution as something that they can toss into the trash can, or views every law as merely a suggestion to an imperial president. But I think we should be concerned that there are 4 judges on the court that actually do believe that. Ironically, they're the ones that come from the so-called strict constructionist school, and they're the ones who consider the Constitution to be the most editable and ignorable. The ruling, which requires further steps, is not the last word on this, and we're going to ultimately see the court have to make a decision about whether the president of the United States can simply ignore laws that are passed by the Congress, like appropriations, like laws establishing agencies, and so forth. And I think we'll see multiple tests of what the president can and can't do. Of course, any sort of objective reading of the law would have one very clear decision. Article 1 of the Constitution gives these powers to the Congress. The president can't abrogate those powers. If the president wishes to shut down an agency or change spending, he should work with the Congress and see if he can get those laws changed or get his agenda passed, because that's the way our system is supposed to work. We're not there yet, but in the daily avalanche of bad news, this is a little glimmer of hope that perhaps there's just enough people on the Supreme Court who care about the Constitution not to set it aflame and toss it away just yet.
The U.S. and Israel have rejected a $53 billion Arab League plan for Gaza's post-war reconstruction, which aims to keep Palestinians in Gaza and rebuild the territory over 5 years, calling for international peacekeepers and a temporary administration. The plan, endorsed by Arab leaders and supported by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, contrasts with President Trump's proposal to resettle Gazans elsewhere and have the U.S. oversee Gaza's reconstruction. Israel and the U.S. criticized the Arab plan as outdated and unrealistic, with Trump advocating for his vision of a Hamas-free Gaza.
Yeah, it's not a vision of a Hamas-free Gaza, by the way. It's an addition. It's a vision of a Palestinian-free Gaza. And what you see here, and this is pretty disturbing, is the United States and Israel doubling down on ethnic cleansing being a central element of any peace plan going forward, which is illegal, immoral, inhumane, and also impossible. But that's where we are, and it's a troubling thing. The Arab League plan is kind of the only plan that most people think would work, and you may have quibbles with one point or another, but the U.S. and Israel want the Arabs to pay for rebuilding Gaza, but apparently do not want the Arabs to set any of the terms. They just want them to write them a check. I don't think it's going to happen. At this point, I do have to say, because we're, journalists here above anything else, that we do have podcasts on the DSR network that are sponsored by the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates here. They do not affect the content of those podcasts or this podcast. And on a regular basis, we offer objective views of what we see going on in that part of the world. But in the interest of full disclosure, you should know that when I say something like the Arab League plan makes sense, it's not because, sponsorships we've got here. It's because that's what I actually think. But, with all the information available to you about us, you can go and make your own decisions about the quality of our judgment here. Next.
Senator Cory Booker revealed he was behind a social media campaign involving 22 Democratic senators, all posting videos criticizing President Trump ahead of his address to Congress. The videos highlighted Trump's broken promises on lowering prices, calling out inflation and the impact of his actions on essential government programs. Elon Musk, who had offered a Cybertruck for proof of who wrote the script, was mocked by Booker for his challenge, as Republicans criticized the campaign for lacking originality.
Can you imagine offering a Cybertruck? That's like a penalty. A Cybertruck is the ugliest mass-produced vehicle in the history of mass-produced vehicles. And I, include in that, who was it that made the Aztec? That was a really ugly car a number of years back.
Pontiac, right? The Pontiac Aztec.
Was it the Pontiac Aztec? Yeah, that was particularly bad. But the Cybertruck is hideous. And every time I see one now, I say, "Oh, there's a Trumper." That's a Trump guy. That car and Tesla. And I'm sorry if you own one, and I understand if you can't just sell it to get rid of it. A lot of people sort of come up, get in my face by saying, "Well, I can't just dump my Tesla." Okay, don't. But recognize that any support for Tesla is a support for Musk, is a support for Trump, is a support for an agenda, frankly, that isn't even pro-electric car. Trump doesn't want electric cars. He wants Musk cars. And he's trying to get rid of charging stations and everything else. And, if you own an electric car and there's a president who's saying, "I'm not going to build charging stations," you got a problem. So, don't own the Tesla because you think it's got an environmentally good consequence. It doesn't have an environmentally good consequence. In any event, that's a side rant here. Let's move on to whatever's next.
That was our last story.
Oh, it was. Well, see, that wasn't as bad as all that. Peace going off the rails in the Middle East, dishonest peace talks around Ukraine, president shrouding an authoritarian agenda in a bunch of lies. And there was the positive Supreme Court. That's not so bad. Of course, you didn't talk about the stock market. How did that do yesterday? Not so good, right? Like all the gains the stock market has seen since Election Day were wiped away because of these tariffs. And of course, the tariffs remain in place because we want to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States, the flow across the Canadian border. Riley, you're from state that's near the Canadian border. Kind of there's a lake and then you go up to, does a lot of fentanyl pour into Ohio? Is that from Canada?
I was going to say, well, yes, but not from Canada.
Yeah, none of it comes from Canada, does it? Zero fentanyl comes from Canada.
Well, not zero, 44 pounds, David. Come on.
Yeah,
that's a lot of pounds.
More fentanyl than any of us can handle, I suppose. But having said that, before we went on the air, I thought you made a great suggestion, which is Canadian fentanyl, which doesn't actually exist as a thing. It would be a great name for a band, you said? I thought that was...
I think like a punk band called Canadian Fentanyl would be pretty good.
Yeah, and I kind of open to the idea of doing a podcast called Canadian Fentanyl, because it's just so much of what this administration does is founded in big, huge, whopping lies. And they're giant lies, lies about the way diseases spread, lies about what they're doing to the government, lies about the amount of money that's being given to Ukraine by us or by the Europeans, lies about everything. And so, we need a term that really captures the nature of those lies. Canadian fentanyl would be a good one. We can do a weekly lie report. And now this week with Trump administration lies, Minna Stein. We could give you 10 hours a day or 10 hours a week.
On the podcast, you could talk about all of the 150-year-olds who are receiving Social Security checks.
Exactly. By the way, folks.
And the 350-year-old.
Yeah. By the way, folks, do you know why that's happening? Because
Americans are so healthy. Thank you, Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm the 350-year-old, by the way. And I got to tell you something. It's because the way computer code was written in some of these, the thing we really ought to be focused on is that some of the computers are so old that they use code so old that it sends it defaults to a message about when people were born in certain circumstances that creates the illusion that these people are of some impossible age. Obviously, the number of people who are getting paid by Social Security who are over the age of 120 is, just take a wild guess. What is the number? It's zero, because there aren't any. Okay. And the most recent assessment of fraud in Social Security payments suggested that 99.7% of all payments were legit. This is just made up nonsense, as was the litany of other kind of crazy things that the president listed last night. He then said, well, we have $100 billion in savings thanks to Elon. Elon's own website says they only have 16 billion. And that's based on a bunch of lies and savings that were already identified. It's like the immigration thing, folks. There aren't big increases in rounding up illegal aliens because the Biden administration was doing a pretty good job of it. The Obama administration was doing an even better job of it, if that's your goal. Personally, I think they were being too harsh on some of these people, but let's assume that was the goal. Trump is not being able to get back to Obama levels. So what does he do? To go back to this point, he says last month was the lowest number of border crossings in history. Wasn't true. That's just not the case. But he says, but Joe Biden is responsible for destroying the economy. But the economists said our economy was the envy of the world when Biden was leaving office. And on and on and on, lie after lie after lie. We'll call them out here as we see them. If you see a lie that you particularly like us to follow up on, go into our Discord or call, get to us on, Blue Sky. We're not on Twitter because evil. But go find us on some social media or, find out our email addresses, or, go to Discord, and we'll talk about your favorite Trump lies. Because we listen. How do you know? Because at the beginning I said, I'm not going to shout because I didn't want to make anybody nervous, as I did yesterday. So it was very calm today, and we'll be calm tomorrow. And that's thanks to you, because we love you, all of our listeners, at the DSR Daily. So join our regular show later today. Join our other shows on the way. Listen to our great episode of Siliconsciousness that we did this week. It's a really good one. Listen to our nuke show if you haven't listened to that yet, because that's scary as shit. And listen to us here each and every day. So we'll see you then. Thanks, Riley. Thanks, Minna. Bye-bye.